Thank you very much, Harold Burson, for agreeing to participate in our oral history project for the new Arthur W. Page Center at Penn State University. I look forward to hearing about your long and prosperous career in public relations. I'd like to begin our interview today by just talking a bit about your history in the industry. If you could please explain some significant events of the early part of your career, and how did that lead into your establishment of your first agency?
The first eventful chapter was that I had a client and was able to start my own business. I had worked for an engineering building company, one of the large engineer building companies during World War II. It would today have been the equivalent of a Bechtel or a Halliburton. And I had worked for the CEO, traveling with him while doing publicity for the company. Unfortunately, when I was in the service, he died, and I did not want to go back to that company as an employee. And I proposed to the management that I start my own business in New York and that they become my first client. And I was able to do what I look back on as a very respectable publicity job for a company that was in an industry that was really not one of the glamour industries. In fact, I was able to get them into Time magazine. I was able to get them into a Reader's Digest article. I was also able to get one of their projects, a large corn processing plant, into Life magazine. And so I think my early reputation was based on being a very effective publicist. And I still think that the publicity function is one of the most significant in our business. And unfortunately, I feel that people today in the field are not doing as good as aggressive a publicity job as we did 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Your first office, how many employees did you have in that office, and how did you separate the responsibilities for them?
My first office was a desk in my client up in the Graybar building. I had another client who was in a different type of engineering business, and he gave me desk space in his office and the use of a secretary and a telephone. And I started just in that small space for about a year. And it was about a year I then had my first office over on Broadway and 57th Street. And my first employee actually was my wife. I got married in October of 1947, and she had been a secretary, and so she quit her job and started working for me. And about the same time, I hired a young man who was going to Columbia University, whom I had met in the Army, and he was getting his college degree. He had been drafted before he finished college, and he worked for me as a part-time employee. He left me, later became the regional director of news for CBS and NBC on the West Coast. So we started with very modest beginnings. By 1952, I had 5 people, including myself, and we all kept fairly busy.
In those days, did you imagine what your company would become in later years?
I could never have imagined that. I thought that if we ever grew to be 20, 25 people, it would be a great success. You must remember that after World War II, there were literally dozens, probably a couple of hundred people here in New York who had started public relations firms after having been public information officers in the armed services. I was one of those. And some of them had already grown to have 10, 15, 20 people, and I was extremely envious of those and wondered if I would ever be able to achieve that kind of success and that kind of growth. The interesting thing is that of that number, there are only really a handful of people, firms, that have maintained and grown and prospered from those days. The first one was was Reuter and Finn, actually. Bill Reuter and David Finn started back in the very early 50s. I think Dan Edelman came second, started shortly after that. And then he was in Chicago, of course. I came along, started Burson Marstella. Actually, my own business started in '46. I met Bill Marstella in '52. We started Burson Marstella in '53. Golan Harris, which was then called Cooper Golan, I think, out in Chicago, started about that time also. And I think those were probably the only real survivors that made a great success. Of course, Fleischman started out in St. Louis about that time, too, maybe a little bit earlier than, I think they started during the war, or maybe even a little bit before World War II.
How did your experiences in World War II assist you when you did open your first office?
In a very unusual way. I went into the Army relatively late. I went in very early 1944. I could have stayed out of the war because I was working for a defense essential industry. I felt that I should go into the Army before the war ended. And I was put into an engineer combat group which went to Europe. We were in Normandy about 7 or 8 weeks after the invasion. And I learned very little that helped me directly in my business during the time that the war was going on. I suppose the greatest lesson I had was that I was living with people that different backgrounds, different socioeconomic structure than I had grown up in. Largely a bunch of people from Appalachia, and who were great soldiers and great people. And I learned a lot about people and how they reacted from them, because you live so closely with people when you're in the Army, and particularly when you're under fire. I got a great break after the war. I was able to get into the news staff of American Forces Network, which was the Army radio network in Europe. Arguably one of the greatest radio networks ever, because we were able to use all the programming of all the radio networks in the United States at that time, and so we had a great lineup of programs. And after the war, I was assigned to cover the Nuremberg trial. I was at the trial from the day it started on November 20th, 1945. I stayed until the end of March 1946. The trial continued through most of the summer. And in fact, this is the 60th anniversary of the close of the trial. And just recently I was in the studio being photographed, being taped by BBC, which is doing a 3-hour documentary. But I, I, I covered the trial. I was in a courtroom day after day after day. And when I got back, one of the things that people wanted to talk to me about was the Nuremberg trial. And so I had a lot of entree that I possibly would not have had if I had not been at Nuremberg. And that's probably what I got most out of the Army that had effect on my business.
In your professional opinion, what constitutes ethical public relations?
I think ethical public relations is a factor of mainly adhering to what you believe is truthful in presenting your clients, representing your client in a way that serves his interest, but only insofar as you can be truthful in what you purport to be the message, the facts. I think truth is, or the closest thing you can come to truth, is the essence of ethical public relations. Also, being sensitive to whom you are representing. I believe that every institution, every person is entitled to have public relations representation. I do not believe that I am compelled in any way or manner to be the one who provides that counsel representation. On the other hand, I think that there are unpopular causes which are legitimate and with which I may not agree. I do not think it unethical for me to represent that client as long as I can do so in a way that my client is not compromised by my bias or disagreement with what the cause or the purpose is. I think that I am an advocate for a client, just as a lawyer is an advocate, that I am engaged to motivate individuals or groups to take a position or to take an action that my client seeks to have taken. I think I should, however, as a public relations professional, make the judgment on whether I represent such a client by asking myself the question, is what this client wants to do in the public interest? And I think that is a factor that is very important, sometimes overlooked. The fact is, I believe that no action can be sustained or successful if in the long run it is not in the public interest.
Is it important, therefore, for a corporation to have an ethical mission statement or credo to help guide them in their decision-making process?
I think symbolically it is. It's something to fall back on, and it also is a guideline for corporations to give to employees, so that employees really have an idea of what the company's mission is, what its expectations of behavior are. So yes, I would strongly subscribe to a mission statement or a credo.
Would you support any sort of ethical training for staff members upon being hired at either an agency like yours or a corporation?
I think it should be part of the indoctrination program for any employee, and also any follow-up supplementary training that employees have. I think that I would go to the having every year perhaps a reminder this is the kind of company we are. I don't think that you can overdo telling your employees that that we do business with honor. We respect the law. We respect the norms of society. No, I fully believe that, and I think the good companies do that.
When hiring or selecting senior people for your organization, what abilities and characteristics are most important to you?
It depends on the job. Generally, characteristics that we look for in everybody are integrity, an intellectual curiosity, commitment to a good work ethic, broad general knowledge of what is going on in the world around him or her, and particularly so in senior hires today, a knowledge base in a field where we need expertise so that we can substantively advise our clients. If we're looking for an environmental specialist, we want someone who has had experience with environmental organization, with environmental regulations, with enforcement of our environmental regulations. If it's in the healthcare field, we want someone who really knows the pharmaceutical industry, someone who knows how FDA works. Increasingly, we are a knowledge-based company where we provide counsel on what the decision should be, and not alone the mere fact that we're communicating that decision. I, some years ago, made a talk in which I said there has been a maturation of public relations over the last 30, 40 years, and the progression has been, first we had the how do I say it era, and that was probably up until the 60s, when management would make a decision, call in their publicity manager, publicity director, some call them public relations directors, and said, you know, we've decided to do thus and so, write it up for us so that we can get it out to the media. And so the PR person would go down to his typewriter and write the story, and they'd send the release out, and newspapers would publish it. In the 60s, which was a very decisive decade for public relations, perhaps the most decisive decade of all, where there was so many changes in society in that decade, women's rights, minority rights, the consumer's right to know, environmental laws, truth in lending, that public relations really came to the fore. There were a lot of protest marches, and really CEOs weren't prepared for that kind of environment. And hardly any other people in the organization were either. So the logical person who had to deal with them was the public relations person. And I think public relations moved from how do I say it to what do I say when these women marched on corporate headquarters, or when there were protest groups from NGOs who were asking about more information on pricing or ingredients or some other subject. So the public relations person escalated, I think, in importance within the organization. And in more recent years, it has advanced even more to, from what do I say, to really what do I do. And today, if you look at the organization charts of many of the Fortune 100 and 500 companies, you'll find that the senior public relations communications officer is usually on the management board, has a title of senior vice president, or in some cases executive vice president, and really is part of that decision-making process that the CEO has to articulate, and is playing a vital role in the management of the company, in addition to the communications function, which comes after the decision-making and the behavior of the company.
So in other words, that person is being trusted with contributing more than just their input about the communications.
Oh, absolutely.
They're looking at the bigger picture.
And I think sometimes that the work that public relations people do is trivialized by the descriptor that has taken the place of public relations, which is communications. I think I've said before that I think that was one of the worst disservices that ever happened to public relations, when communications became the label that describes what we do, because communications is only part of our function, and arguably the least important part.
So how you label a position, therefore, is very important.
I think
too.
it's extremely important.
How that position is defined, both inside the organization as well as outside.
That's outside.
Okay. Well, given that last explanation that you just described, what therefore is the role of the economic bottom line in decision making for an organization, and what role, in your opinion, should it play?
Well, I think that you've got to distinguish between doing public relations for a corporation or some other institution, profit or not-for-profit, and for a public relations firm like ours. Of course, economics play a part in, decisions of all kinds. You weigh the economic impact of any decision you make, whether it's corporate or others. But in running a business like this, you've got to be very much more conscious of the economics of it than you do when you're managing a budget for a corporation. I don't really understand the impact of your question, frankly.
I was speaking economics broadly in terms of...
Well, economics affect every decision that a corporation makes. You have to consider, what is it going to cost? What's it going to bring us back? What does it cost us if we don't do something? What does it cost if we do, and to what extent do we want to do it? So I think economics is just a major part of being in a business, managing a business.
A moment ago, we were speaking about the importance of naming positions, whether it be a public relations, communications, marketing, or advertising. In recent years, those terms have become, muddled together, and especially advertising and public relations, and also on the agency side, a lot of mergers and whatnot. Now, what do you feel that has impacted the industry overall of public relations?
I think it's resulted in a certain amount of confusion. I think that public relations is not really, the definition of public relations is really not clear even to many, if not most, public relations practitioners. Many public relations people equate public relations with communications, and only communications. I think communications is only one half of the overall process. I think the other half is counseling, consulting with management on strategies, on behavior patterns, on decisions, and then communicating. One of the most simplistic definitions of public relations that I know of is public relations is doing good and getting credit for it. First, you have to do good. I don't think all the communications in the world can accomplish any real good or lasting good unless it is based on good conduct, good behavior, providing a satisfactory service, providing a satisfactory product. I think that the big mistake is when people say, shall we use advertising or public relations to help support a product sale or an issue or whatever. Actually, public relations is really more of an umbrella term even than advertising. Advertising can be a subset of public relations and is in many kinds of programs. Basically, I equate the term publicity with advertising. Getting material to the potential consumer or the person you want to motivate through other media and doing it in a way other than buying paid advertising space or paying for time on television or radio or the internet.
You write in your book that opening your first international office was a major turning point in the evolution of your agency. Could you please explain why this expansion was important to you, and in addition, explain what do you feel the role of an international presence is in today's public relations industry?
The opening, when we made the decision to open our first office in Europe, and that decision was made in 1960, and we actually opened the office in February of '61. It differentiated Burson Marsteller from the pack of smaller agencies, which we were at the time, and really made us, quote, the other international PR firm. The only other firm that really was seriously involved in international who had an overseas operation was Hill & Knowlton. Hill & Knowlton at that time was probably 10, 12 times the size that Burson Marsteller was. And by opening that office, we attracted a lot of attention to ourselves, which we would not have had. And I feel that it was a differentiation that has actually served this firm until the present. That it differentiated us as a, in those terms, we used the term international. Today we use global. In the interim, we had used multinational. But it really separated us and had people talking about us, and I think resulted in much more rapid growth than we would have had otherwise. And as I look back on that decision, which was made now almost 60 years ago, 55 years ago, it, I think, was really a very far-sighted decision, and frankly, I had not thought it thoroughly through, but I had thought it through to the point that I felt that we would be opening offices as we went along in Asia, in Latin America, and Australia. In 1959, my associates and I gathered together over a weekend and developed what we called a long-range plan. And that long-range plan visualized public relations as a global business, which it has become. As you may know, for about 25 or 30 years, actually Burson Marsteller and Hill and Knowlton were the only significant global public relations firms. In the 90s, late 80s and 90s, when the large advertising agencies started buying the large public relations firms, that's when they started going overseas. But we in H&K had the international global market pretty much to ourselves for the better part of a quarter century. And today, of course, it's much more competitive because there are 8 or 10 major firms that have offices in practically every city in every country that we do now.
The Tylenol crisis in the early 1980s has subsequently been written about in many public relations textbooks as being an excellent example of crisis management. Will you please explain the evolution of that term crisis management and specifically the role your agency played in that event?
I really don't know the evolution of the term crisis management. I think that it very likely preceded Tylenol, but I'm not sure. I think, however, we as a public relations firm, as much as any other, helped make crisis management part of the common industry vernacular. We were brought into the Tylenol situation for 2 reasons. First, we had them as a client when, for some years after they went over the counter back in the 70s. The first crisis was 1982. And also, as part of Young and Rubicam, which we became part of in 1979, Ed Ney, who was then the CEO of Young and Rubicam when it first broke, suggested that to Jim Burke, their CEO, that perhaps Burson Marsteller could help them. I, at the time, happened to be in Europe. I was in Paris. My associate, Jim Dowling, who was our number 2 person at the time, started talking with Jim Burke and also with Larry Foster. And the hero of Tylenol was basically Jim Burke, I think, and I'm pretty sure that Larry Foster would agree with me on this, that Jim really managed that crisis. For several weeks, he spent full time managing it. And also he played a very major part in the communications and the decision-making part leading up to the communications for that crisis. we had the privilege of supporting Jim and supporting Larry in that crisis. One of the things that we did that I think helped in the resolution and restoration of the product regaining market share was the fact that we suggested that instead of having one big press conference in New York to reintroduce the repackaged tamper-resistant Tylenol packages, that instead of having one big press conference in New York, that we have about 30 downlinks to local markets and make it a local story. And at that time, it actually made it two local stories because it was so early in the days of the use of satellite transmission that the fact that we were doing a satellite press conference not only showed the importance of how important Tylenol felt it was to inform the public about this, but it also was really reported as a technological achievement where people said, gee whiz, they're able to have this conference at the Waldorf up in New York, and the local press is invited to a local hotel here, a local venue, to see the press conference. And instead of being buried someplace back in the paper, we dominated a lot of front pages in the major markets for the product. We got a lot of credit for participating in that, but as I would say, I think the real drivers of that program were Jim Burke, who was the CEO, Larry Foster was his chief public relations person. We were very privileged to work along with Saddam. When the second Tylenol crisis came on, 1985, I actually participated very deeply, personally, in that one. And again, same pattern was followed. Jim Burke ran the program. He set up more or less a war room in one of his conference rooms, and for days and days and days, he just devoted full time to trying to get that situation resolved.
Could you please explain what was the second crisis in 1985?
Second crisis was in Bronxville, same type thing. Somebody was able to penetrate the package and put toxic material in the product, and I believe 3 people died.
Do you recall which city?
Bronxville, New York.
Okay.
Yeah, it was not very far from here.
The last section of questions I would like to transition to will be dealing primarily with education and what you feel the next generation of workers can do in order to become successful public relations executives. Are younger workers today fully prepared for a successful career in public relations? Do you feel that they are getting appropriate education and work experience, for example, internships, for the younger workers entering the marketplace today? Are they prepared?
I think it's very difficult to generalize. I think some are and some are not. And I think it depends on the teaching quality, the advice that these young people have had, the good luck or fortune that some of them have been exposed to getting good internships. The majority, of course, have not. I find that you get some very, very bright people coming into the business, very, very well prepared, and you get a lot of people who just do not have some of the basic skills. And the one basic skill that's lacking in most of the younger people coming into the business today is that their writing ability is not nearly as good as it was some years ago. And I think that is a major deficiency. I think that most of the people who come into public relations, really start getting their real training after they get on the job. And I think those of us who are in agencies or are running public relations departments have got to realize that as we take on new people, training them and development of those people is a major part of our responsibility if we want them to be good, capable employees. It's very difficult for me to really tell you what I think is the ideal training for a public relations person. All of us have a tendency, particularly those of us who have achieved some degree of success, to look at how we got where we were and say, that's the way you've got to do it. I belong to the school, as does some of those my age who have had successful careers, my generation. We started mostly on newspapers or with press associations, and were reporters and writers for 2, 3, 4, 5 years before we went into the business. I still think that newspaper experience or journalism experience doesn't necessarily have to be newspapers, but I would say if I had my choice, I would prefer hiring some person who had been on a small town newspaper for a couple of years or worked with the press association. Because those are people who really have to write it themselves. They don't get a lot of rewriting. And when you see their byline, you know it's their story. On the other hand, we have a need for so many specialists today that we look for people who've had experience working in the government, working in politics. We look for people who have experience who with MBAs, who know business, particularly in the finance area. We look for people who, in consumer publicity, if you work on food accounts, if they've had food experience, nutritional experience particularly, is getting more and more important today as we start looking at every ingredient in a product. So there is no real, I think, roadmap. You have to create your set of skills and based on what you feel you want to do with your life, what field you want to work in, and get experience in that particular area, whether it be a government or science or business. I think the time may come within the next decade that agencies like Burson and Marsteller will be looking for people who have the equivalent of an MBA degree before we hire them. I think these integrated programs at some schools, Northwestern particularly, is an example where they have interdisciplinary programs where you study public relations in addition to science, you study public relations in addition to healthcare, or in addition to political science, politics, or business. I think those programs probably will increase in number.
How important is mentoring in the workplace?
Oh, it's essential, I think. If you for every successful person, and I'm talking about ranges of success, you usually find they have had someone in their careers or some few people in their careers who have early on identified them, that person, helped them in their careers, steered them, served as advice, as inspiration. And very frankly, that's one of the things I'm proudest of, is how many people I've worked with have done it so well. We really encourage our senior people to do as much mentoring as they possibly can with their younger people.
Is professional accreditation necessary in your profession of public relations, similar to, a law degree or a medical degree, accounting?
Idealistically, it is. Unfortunately, it has not really had much impact in our business. And I think one reason is that it is very difficult to define a public relations person. The range of what public relations people do is extremely broad, and some people serve merely as advisors, never have anything to do with implementation, and they public relations people. Some people are working in entertainment, some people are working in food and in fashion, and others with corporations and not-for-profits. The field is so broad and diverse that I think it is very difficult to do a proper accrediting job. Anyone can call himself a public relations person. Edward Bernays, who had a tremendous impact on this business, was a very strong proponent of licensing. Felt that public relations people should be licensed like chartered public accountants or lawyers. All the time he was doing that, I was against it. I just didn't feel that the government should have a role in deciding who was a public relations person, who wasn't. As I think about it more now, I'm not so sure that I was right. I think he may have been right, that the field would be much more identifiable and have stature if it were licensed.
In many undergraduate public relations programs, including Penn State, women students far outnumber men in the undergraduate ranks. Are there particular components of a public relations profession that you feel attracts more women? And why do you think there is such a disparity between men and women in this field? At least at that level there is.
Well, at all levels. It's interesting. We have 50 offices or thereabouts. And I would say that the ratio in those 50 offices is at least 2/3 female, 1/3 male. Some as high as 80% female, 20% male, but the average probably is 2/3, 1/3. I have pondered that and tried to figure it out and talked with academics about, why are men eluding public relations. I think the women who go into it are very good, but even the women, certainly those who have been around for a while, feel that the last thing they want is for public relations to be known as a place where women do that work. First place, colleges, the college attendance today is now more female than it is male. So you start out with that, and it's not, you know, great. It's not. It's probably like 53-47 or 54-46 or something like that, but growing. And of course, as you say, if you go into almost any college communications, journalism schools, my observation is it's about 80-20. And I do 2 or 3 or 4 college talks a year, and they're all the same. And one reason I think that males are separating themselves away, particularly the more capable males, is basically financial rewards. I think that they feel it's more lucrative to go into law, it's more lucrative to go into the business schools, marketing, finance, and it's just primarily a money decision that they've made. Now, some people on campuses tell me I give too much credit to those young people. They're not thinking that far ahead. I feel that we would get more males into this business if the starting salaries were, entry-level salaries were higher than they are. On the other hand, I think women are attracted to it because it's something they do well. And also, and I'm also told that women at that age don't think this far ahead, but public relations is one of the few careers a woman can enter. Work for 5, 6, 7 years, start having a family, take off for 4 or 5 years, and re-enter without a significant penalty to her career. Can't do that with law, can't do that with medicine, can't do that in business generally, but you can do it, particularly if you've established a good record and you've networked properly. These women come back after their kids are in school and they do extremely well, and their careers just move on as though they had stayed. And so I think that's why, it's a positive reason for the women coming in, but it doesn't answer why the men stay out.
What do you believe is the single greatest challenge facing public relations executives in today's business climate? In having a knowledge base that qualifies them to be a counselor to the senior managements, the CEOs, to have the knowledge base in the business that qualifies them to be a peer of those people they serve with on a management committee. How would you like to be remembered? What legacy would you like to leave, both personally and professionally?
Let me put it another way, the thing that I am proudest of, as I look back over the 55 years of Burson Marsteller, 53 years of Burson Marsteller, and my own total of 60 years in the business, is that I created job opportunities for a lot of people who either have succeeded at Burson Marsteller or who have gone elsewhere and succeeded. And there are about 25,000 of them. And I like to think that if I had not come along, they may not have had those opportunities to get the experience that enabled them to do as well as they did. I take great deal of personal satisfaction in the emails and letters that I get on a really regular basis telling me how important their years at Burson Marsteller were to them. And it gives me a real sense of pride and accomplishment.
And what do you feel is the future of your industry? If you could look ahead 10, 20, 30 years ahead into the future, where do you think the public relations industry will be situated at that time?
I think it will be increasingly important, and I think there will be, a role for both agencies. I think the importance of the position internally will continue to accelerate. I think the global firms will play an increasingly important role, because I think companies now are beginning to recognize that you have to speak with one voice around the world, that you are one company around the world, and that you have to have people who help cement your organization. And I think the big public relations firms are capable of doing that. That's not to say that there's not always going to be a place for the mid-size and the smaller boutique firms, but I think when you have global businesses, you're going to have large global organizations to serve them. The one differentiation of Burson Marsteller from its 8 or 10 major competitors is that we, more than anybody else, are one company around the world. We have a single culture that I think most people in other agencies would recognize as probably the standard against which to measure. And the way that came about is that we were able to grow organically around the world, as opposed to going out and buying up a lot of different agencies and trying to clobber them together. We were able to do this over a 40-year period, and we would usually send our own people into a country, hire local people, train them, and our objective being to have local management as quickly as we possibly could in the various countries around the world. And I'm very proud today that there's hardly an office outside the United States that's not managed by a local national. Some of them are managed by third country nationals, but there are very few Americans who are managing offices in countries outside the United States. And we have a communication system that we have developed, a computer allowing us to do this, that's really tied our company together. We have the largest data bank of case histories, largest data bank of programs of any agency around. And that not only keeps us from reinventing the wheel every time we do a new type of project, but it also establishes a uniformity. If you go to one Burson Marsteller office, the solution to the problem is likely to be comparable to what other offices have done, because we have all these cases on databases that people can see what we've done before. And we work very hard at being what we call a seamless company around the world.